In this video, we are going to learn about default function parameters, which are a very useful feature that was introduced in ES6, which is the latest version of JavaScript. But before we dive into that, let's do a quick recap of what functions are and why they are so important in JavaScript. Functions are reusable blocks of code that perform a specific task. They allow us to write modular, maintainable, and readable code. They also enable us to create abstractions and higher order functions, which are functions that can take other functions as arguments or return them as values. Now, functions are one of the core concepts of JavaScript, and there is still a lot that we can learn about them. In the next few videos, we are going to explore some advanced topics related to functions, such as the bind method, closure, and arrow functions. These topics are essential for mastering JavaScript and becoming a better developer. So make sure you watch this video till the end and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Now let's get started with the default function parameters. Default function parameters are parameters that have a default values assigned to them in case the function is called without passing an argument for that parameter. This can be very handy when we want to make our functions more flexible and avoid errors or unexpected behaviors. Now, to understand how default functions parameter work, let's look at an example. Suppose we have a function called greet that takes a name as a parameter and returns a greeting message. Here is how we can define this function. First, our function keyword, then the name of the function is greet, then this function takes one parameter which is name, then our block of code, and here this function only return hello, then our placeholder, and at the end we have exclamation mark like this. Now let's see what happens when we call this function with different arguments like greet. Then here we are using the name Alice like this. Then on the next line we are going to use Bob, and on the third line we don't use any argument like this. Now in order to show the output of this function we need to use our console.log like this. Now I am just pasting these in our console.log like this. Now here we need to remove this semicolon. Now if I hit save, you can see our function works fine when we pass a valid name as an argument, but it returns a weird message when we don't pass any argument, as you can see here. Hello undefined. This is because here the name parameter is undefined by default, and this is because we are not giving any name to this function as an argument. That is why we are getting undefined. So this is not what we want, and it can cause confusions or bugs in our code. Now to fix this problem, we can use if statement to check if the name parameter is defined, and if not, assign a default value to it. For example, we can use stranger as a default name like this. Now here we can write if name is equal to undefined, then here we will assign a value to this name variable, and here we can write name is equal to stranger like this. Now if I hit save, you can see our code is working. However, this solution is not very elegant or concise. We have to write an extra line of code and use a comparison operator to check for undefined. Fortunately, ES6 introduced a better way to handle this situation, which is default function parameters. With default function parameters, we can assign a default value to a parameter directly in the function definition by using the equal sign. And here is how we can write this same thing. So I am just commenting this, and now instead of doing this, we are going to use our default function parameters, and here after this name parameter we are going to use our equal sign, and here we can write stranger like this. Now you can see we are getting the same result, but this is much simpler and cleaner than the previous version. Our function behaves exactly the same as before, but with less code and more clarity. We can also use any valid expression as a default value, such as a variable, a function call, or an arithmetic operation. For example, we can use the math.random function to generate a random number as a default name. Now here we can write plus, then math.floor, and here we can write math.random multiply by 100 like this. Now if I hit save, you can see we are getting hello stranger 67, and now our function will return different message every time we call it without an argument. Now if we refresh, you can see now we are getting hello stranger 17. If we refresh this again, you can see now we are getting hello stranger 2. So basically here by doing this, we are generating a random number, and then we are concatenating that number with this stranger string. So this can be useful for creating dynamic and interactive functions that can adapt to different situations. Now the default function parameters are not limited to one parameter. We can use them for multiple parameters as long as they are at the end of the parameter list. For example, we can write a function called add that takes two numbers as parameter and returns their sum. We can assign default values to both parameters such as 0 and 1. Now here we are going to create our add function like this, and here this function takes two parameter x and y, and here this function will log x plus y like this. Now after this we are going to give these parameter default values like x is equal to 0 and y is equal to 1. Now if we call this function like add 2 and 3, then add 2, and for our last call, if we don't give any parameter, if we hit save, you can see we are getting 5 because here we are giving both arguments for our x and for our y value. But in here we are giving only one value, which is for our x parameter. So 2 plus 1, in result we are getting 3. So here in our last call we are not using any argument. So that is why 1 plus 0, and here we have 1. And now if we only want to give this y parameter a value, we can write undefined for our x, and then we can use our comma to separate these two arguments. And if we hit save, you can see here for our x we are using undefined, and for our second parameter which is y we are using 2, and in result we are getting 2. So by using this undefined here as an argument, we can skip a parameter and use its default value. This can be useful when we want to use the default value for one parameter but not for another. Now one thing to keep in mind is that default function parameters are evaluated at the time of the function call, not at the time of the function definition. This means that if we use a variable or a function call as a default value, it will use the current value or result of that expression, not the initial one. For example, let's say here we have a global variable which is counter, and this counter variable is equal to 0. And now we are going to increment this counter variable by 1 every time we call this add function. Now here to increment our counter variable, we are going to write counter plus plus like this. Now let's see what happens when we call this function multiple times. Now here we are going to call this function add, and here as an argument I am using 2 and 3. Now for the second call I am just using 2, and for these calls I am not using any value. Now if I hit save, you can see the default value for y changes every time we call the function, because it uses the current value of counter, which is incremented by default after each function call. This can lead to unexpected results. So be careful when using expressions that can change as default values. Now, default function parameters are a great way to make our function more flexible and robust. They allow us to avoid errors and handle different scenarios with ease. They also make our code more concise and readable, which is always a good thing. Default function parameters are supported by most modern browsers, but if you need to support older browsers, you can use a transpiler like Babel to convert your ES6 code to ES5 code. And that is it for today's video. I hope you learned something new. If you did, please hit the like button and leave a comment below. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel to join this web development journey with us. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.